Good morning everyone, it's time for Jackanory 2, the sequel to the first Jackanory. It was so successful that we've decided to come back for more each day. Now we shared one of our favourite Roald Dahl stories, George's Marvellous Medicine, in our first series. Now we're going to share another of those famous tales in our second series. Our second series book is The Twits, and The Twits is quite similar to George's Marvellous Medicine. It has some grotesque characters, it has some really funny bits, it has some crazy bits and pieces in there as well, it has some superb characters, but above all it's a really good story to tell as a performance. It means I can bring characters into it and really go over the top, different voices, and hopefully make you laugh whether you're 4-year-old or 11-year-old. So that's why I've chosen The Twits, because it's a fabulous, funny, amazing performance book. So we're in a different room for Jackanory 2, and we'll be using this room a little more often during this series. We're on the stage. Today, you'll see behind me, we've got the tree up there. We haven't got all the lights on today, but we might do some light ups and the like, and a smoke effects as we move through this particular series. But we're going to start today here in what's a rather sad looking theatre really. It's all ready for you guys, but it's missing you. Anyway, here goes. Here's the first chapter, and I'm going to sit here at the front of the stage to tell you it. First chapter is called Hairy Faces. Hairy Faces? What a strange chapter to begin with. Well, let me read it to you and we'll explain exactly what we mean by hairy faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it's impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing if you've got a hairy face. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when we wash our hair. So what I want to know is this: how often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it just once a week on Sunday nights? Do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed, or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with little nail scissors? I don't know, but next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you go out for your walk after lockdown, maybe you'll look more closely and start wondering about some of those things. Well, enough rambling about hairy faces, but you'll see the reason for that in a moment. Mr. Twit. Now, Mr. Twit was one of the very hairy-faced men, long, black, greying beard. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and his nose, was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and out of his ear holes, and you could plait the hair from his nostrils with his ear hair and it would all tie together and be a... Oh, anyway, enough of that. I think I'm feeling a bit queasy, guys, after that. Mr. Twit felt that this hairiness made him look very wise and very grand, but in truth, you see, he was neither of these things, because Mr. Twit was a twit, and he was born a twit, and now at the age of 60 he was a bigger twit than he'd ever been before. The hair on his face didn't grow all smooth and gentle as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in sharp spikes that stuck out straight like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often then, I hear you cry, does Mr. Twit wash this bristly, nail brushy face of his? never washed it. Ever. Not even on Sundays. He hasn't washed it in years. That's really dirty and horrible, isn't it? I can hear you being sick in the distance, guys. Well, let me tell you more about dirty beards. In fact, let's head up onto the stage for the next part, shall we? I'll climb the stairs onto the stage. So, as you know, an ordinary, unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed often enough, and there's nothing so awful about that. But you see, a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy. Gravy really clings to hairs on your face and it stays there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel and we quickly look more or less right again. But hairy men cannot do that. We can also, if we're careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so hairy men. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you'll notice that even if he opens his mouth very, 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 very wide, and that's very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on his hair all around his face. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed as well, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfast and lunch and suppers sticking to the hairs all around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand onto his rather dirty looking sleeve whilst he was eating. But if you looked really closely, guys, not that you'd ever really want to, but if you did, you'd see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled egg stuck to the hairs, or dried bread, or spinach and tomato ketchup, fish fingers, minced chicken livers, and all the other disgusting things that Mr. Twit liked to eat, often on the same plate at the same time, guys. If you looked closer still, and hold your noses everybody while we do this, if you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that have been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese. That's fabulous, isn't it? Or a mouldy old cornflake. Oh, I quite like mouldy old cornflakes, but there we go. Or even the slimy tail of a tinned sardine, which is a tiny fish. Because of all this, Mr. Twit never went really hungry. Just by sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways and all around it, the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel or snack here and there to nibble on whilst he was watching TV. It's not a bad idea actually, guys, is it? Imagine that. It's like having a fridge all the way around your mouth. What I'm trying to tell you though is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also extremely horrid, as you're going to find out in a moment and in the next few weeks when we read the book. Now that's Mr. Twit, guys. Doesn't sound great, does it? Not really picturing him as a film star or TV star. Shall we say he's not someone that's very attractive to the eye. So let's meet Mrs. Twit to see if she's any better. Here we go. Mrs. Twit was no better. In fact, she was possibly even worse. She did not, of course, have a hairy face. Well, not much anyway. It was a pity she didn't, because at any rate it would have hidden some of her fearful ugliness. Have you ever seen a woman in your life with a fearful ugliness face? I doubt you've seen one as fearfully ugly as Mrs. Twit. But the funny thing is that Mrs. Twit wasn't actually born ugly at all. She'd quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she's gotten older. Why would that happen? I'm going to tell you why. You see, if a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on their face. And when that person has ugly thoughts every day, every week, every year, the face gets uglier and uglier until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear to look at it. Ah! A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth. That sounds like Mrs. Denton. But if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you'll always look lovely. That's how it works, you see. I think I'm in trouble with Mrs. Denton, don't you? But you see, nothing shone out of Mrs. Twit's face. In her right hand, she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that this was because she had warts growing all over the sole of her feet, and walking was very painful. But the real reason she carried a stick was that so she could hit things with it, like dogs and cats and small children, so be careful. And then there was the glass eye. She has a glass eye. Mrs. Twit has a glass eye like no others. Mrs. Twit has a glass eye that was always looking the other way from where she was actually looking. I'll tell you about the glass eye before I finish today, shall I? Here goes, the glass eye. Now the glass eye, you can play lots of tricks with the glass eye because you can take it out and you can pop it back in again. And you can bet your life Mrs. Twit knew all those tricks. One morning, you see, she took out a glass eye and dropped it into Mr. Twit's mug of beer when he wasn't looking. He sat there, drinking his beer slowly, slurping the froth around his hairy face. He wiped the froth onto his hand and his sleeve and then onto his trousers, just like he'd been doing for about 30 years. Here's the first chance to use my voice. It's a bit like Grandma from George's Marvellous Medicine. But I'll be honest, I'm not a Shakespearean actor, so I've got a limited range of voices. So here we go. You keep plotting something, Mrs. Twit said, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see that she had taken the glass eye out. Whenever you go all quiet like that, I know very well that you're plotting something. Mrs. Twit was right. Mr. Twit was plotting. He loved to plot. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick that he could play on his wife that day. You'd better be careful, because when I see you starting to plot, I'll watch you like a wombat. Oh, do shut up, you old hag, Mr. Twit said. Good voice, that one, isn't it? He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest horrid trick he was going to play on the old woman. Suddenly, as Mr. Twit tipped the last drop of beer down his throat, he caught sight of Mrs. Twit's awful glass eye staring up at him from the bottom of the mug that she put in. It made him jump. Oh, what's that there? Oh, it's an eye! Oh! I told you I was watching you, cackled Mrs. Twit. I've got my eyes everywhere on you, so you better be careful, Mr. Twit. Now that's Mr. and Mrs. Twit, and those are the kinds of silly, funny tricks they spend all day playing on each other. I hope you aren't doing similar things like that during lockdown, but there we go. Now tomorrow I'm going to show you more of the tricks that Mr. and Mrs. Twit play on each other and try and use those voices again if I can. Tomorrow we're going to start with a trick called the frog. It's a funny one. You'll like it lots. So join us tomorrow morning for more from our new book, The Twits. Be careful. Oh, and by the way, shave those hairy beards off. It's a good idea. you later.